I'm joined now by Colin Allred. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So you've made some news today with the announcement that you are no longer running for the U.S. Senate in Texas, but you've made another announcement here. So can you explain what that is?
Yeah, well, listen, I felt like over the course of this campaign, nothing really moved me more than the trust that Texans had placed in me, and the stories that I'd heard, and the people who would come up to me and tell me their life story when they're just first meeting me, and oftentimes end up in tears. And I thought about them, thinking that a long, bruising Democratic primary that in Texas, because if you don't get over 50% of the vote, you have to go to a runoff. That then having a runoff, that would not be in the interest of the party or of the state in a year when Donald Trump is every day shredding the Constitution, when folks are struggling and they're scared out there. To me, dividing up the party in that way was not something that was going to be useful. And I thought I had a responsibility to be the one to say this is not the road that we should go down. But what I can do is serve in a different way. I can run for Congress in this newly drawn racially gerrymandered district in Dallas. I wish the district did not exist, quite honestly, in terms of the fact that this court case was allowed to go ahead and to say that, when Trump demanded 5 new districts, that the state would give it to him. But since we are here, we need strong voices in the Congress to stand up to Trump, to speak about what's going on, for folks who are struggling with an affordability crisis all around our state, to deal with the rampant corruption that I think is eating away at the faith people have in our institutions. So there's a lot to do, and I'm proud to have the chance to try and represent in my hometown again in Congress.
So I want to talk about your House run in just a moment, but you had mentioned the prospect of a long and bruising runoff or primary into runoff. To what extent does the prospect of Jasmine Crockett entering into the primary here, did that play a role in all of this?
Yeah, of course, and I think it's both that Jasmine is a friend of mine as well, but also the fact that having 3 strong candidates running would virtually guarantee a runoff. And I know a bit about this, and I know what it's going to take
Yeah.
for us to try and flip a state that we haven't won in over 30 years in terms of the Senate race. And to me, the most responsible thing that I could do for the state would be to say, how can I best serve in this situation? I've always tried to put public service first. I've never made it about myself. I think my humility is one of the traits that has often led me down some of the right paths that I've gone down in my life. And to say, well, what way can I serve it that might look a little different? And so that's why I decided to run for this newly drawn district, and to say, to everyone in the party, let's get serious about this and let's make sure that we try and go into November united.
Will you be endorsing in the U.S. Senate race?
Right now, I'm focused on this race and trying to make sure that folks know what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and I'll certainly have some things to say down the road. But I can say with full clarity that Jasmine's a friend of mine. We served together in Congress. We were in the Congressional Black Caucus together. I know her well. I've known her since before we ever ran for office, and so I have respect for her and hope that whoever emerges that we can get behind them.
Now, in terms of your race, I want to talk about the prospect of Latino voters for just a moment, because I think the way that these maps were gerrymandered was by Republicans taking into account, or assuming, I should say, that the Latino voters that swung to Republicans in 2024 were a permanent part of their coalition. And we saw in New Jersey, for example, that Latino voters were swinging not just a few points to the left like the rest of the population, but in some instances 20, 30, 40 points to the left. And so how are you thinking about Latino voters in your own race in Texas's 33rd congressional district?
Listen, I think Latino voters are incredibly important in any race in Texas, certainly in my congressional race, also statewide. And from what I've seen, going all around the state and talking, to Latinos, whether it's in every setting, in high school football games and grocery stores, is that just like every Texan I talk to, they are deeply concerned about the fact that they feel like they're working harder and harder for less. And we have to be, I think, very clear as a party that we need to reconnect with working people, period. And that part of that is certainly saying to folks, we see you, we hear you, we know you're working hard and doing all the right things, and we know that you're not seeing that show up in your bank account or also just in the way that you feel that you're able to get ahead. and that you're seeing folks on TV, on your phones who are openly corrupt, who are cutting corners and who are targeting people, and they're the ones who are doing well while you're not. And that to me is what we have to speak to, have policies to address. And I think that will help us with Latino voters, of course, but also just working class voters across our state who I think are dying for somebody who will say to them, I see you, I have ideas on how we can make things work for you. I know you don't expect everything to be given to you. You're going to work hard for it. And here's how I can help you.
Now, you're running in a district that doesn't exist otherwise. It was newly drawn by Republicans expressly so that they can gerrymander the state. And so what is the partisan breakdown of this state? And then as a follow-up to that question, there are going to be a lot of Democrats running across the country in highly competitive districts. And so what do you say, given folks limited resources, so that they know it's important to focus on this race above some of the races that are separated normally historically by a point?
Yeah, of course. And what they've done in Texas is outrageous. And folks should know this. I mean, we had a ruling by a three-judge panel that said that these districts that they drew were racially gerrymandered in a way that violated the Constitution. And it was written by a Trump appointee who is an otherwise conservative judge who joined an Obama appointee to say this is unacceptable. And the
Yeah.
Supreme Court stepped in just recently and said, actually, it is okay. And so we're going from having 13 members of Democratic members of Congress representing our state to potentially down to 8, and that's for a state with 30 million people, with millions of folks who are looking to have representation. And so those folks who are left after this ridiculous racial gerrymandering that they've done here have to be strong. And those voices are going to become even more important. My responsibility is going to be to, instead of being basically one of 3 members of Democratic members of Congress representing Dallas, to be basically the only one. And so I will have to be a voice for all the folks here who have been locked out of this process by this gerrymandering. And so it's important that we send folks to the Congress in this time who will be a part of the solution, but go in on day one with ideas on how we're going to fight back against Donald Trump and what they're doing, but also to say that we know what we need to do to prevent gerrymandering like this from ever happening again. As a former voting rights lawyer, I know exactly what we can do when we have the power to make sure that we end the practice of doing stuff like this.
There is a world where Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is gutted by the U.S. Supreme Court, and that decision could be returned as early as January, depending on how heavy-handed the Supreme Court wants to be in allowing or giving a permission structure for Republican states to redraw their maps in advance of the 2026 election. And so that process is obviously going to benefit a lot of Republican states. And so what's your plan to convince or persuade your Republican colleagues to sign on to this effort to stop the scourge of gerrymandering, given the fact that they're the ones that are going to be the beneficiaries of it?
That's a great question. And I think that the thing that's most frustrating to me as somebody who worked in voting rights as a career before I was in office is the fact that the Voting Rights Act itself was signed and then reauthorized by President Bush, not that long ago with
Yeah.
Republican votes. And that we used to have a consensus around some of these things, that we should have certain protections on the right to vote, but that now that's become largely a partisan issue. I will say that I think that in terms of the overall redistricting wars going on around the country, which I'm just sick about, that it's not exactly a clean win for Republicans. And as you said, some of what they're relying on here in Texas in this upcoming election is that they'll continue to get the votes that they got from Latinos that Donald Trump got in 2024. And I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a double-edged sword here when it comes to gerrymandering. You can also do dummy mandering.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into Congress in many ways, is that in 2018, they had gerrymandered the state, and the guy who I was running against was in a seat they had drawn for him, but they got a little too greedy and tried to squeeze another couple districts out. And so it put his district as being a little more viable. And so then I was able to beat him. And so that's what can happen when you see these gerrymanders last. And so there may be some room to try and do that. But I think what we have to do is present to the American people the fact that nobody likes it when politicians are picking their voters. Everybody thinks that voters should pick their politicians. Like, this is not everywhere I go, even Republicans I talk to think this is outrageous, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we have to speak very clearly about that and say, if you think this system is rigged, it's because it is. And here's how we're going to unrig it.
And finally, in your travels across the state, To what extent do you think that folks who have voted for Republicans, voted for Trump, or who have refused to vote for Democrats in these last few elections, to what extent do you think that they're gettable in this election cycle, given kind of the con that's been given up by this Republican Party? I mean, the idea that this guy and his party ran as populists, that they were going to lower the cost of housing, of rent, of groceries, of eggs, and now they've presided over, with full control of government, so there's no Democrats to blame, presided over the rising costs of everything, over the gutting of healthcare, gutting of food assistance. We're going to see ACA subsidies get eliminated, which means healthcare for 24 million Americans is about to get 2, 3, 4, 5 times more expensive. And that's not at all what these people ran on. And meanwhile, during all of this, you've got Donald Trump enshrining the Oval Office in gold, buying himself jets, buying Kristi Noem jets, hosting crypto dinners, doing let them eat cake parties at Mar-a-Lago. And so to what extent do you think that people recognize that, and that is going to supersede their otherwise partisan affiliation to the GOP?
Yeah. I know some people have kind of the opinion, and I'll hear people say this from time to time, that, nothing matters. And whatever Trump does, people aren't paying attention. And I just could not disagree more. I mean, I spent this, campaign going to people where they were, on construction sites, in grocery stores, in restaurants, working with them. And I'm telling you, folks see this.
Yeah.
And they know it. And they know that they're working hard and they feel like they're getting less. And they see some of these jackasses who are openly corrupt, who are just kind of waving it in front of them and saying, what are you going to do about it? Right? And I think what we have to be is that party that steps into that void and says, listen, whatever you think about the Democratic Party previously, this is outrageous. We know this is a rigged system, and here's what we're going to do to unrig it, not just against the Republicans, but also so you don't think that Democrats are rigging it for ourselves either, that we're going to fix this for you.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of disconnect that I've seen at times, is that we can sometimes get too locked up in, kind of the white paper world and policy world. And listen, I'm a policy nerd too. I can go all day on those things. But we have to speak to the emotion that people feel. And I think there is a real opportunity here in Texas in this election to do that and to say to people, you were lied to, you were betrayed, you were promised, like you said, that costs were going to go down, and they have skyrocketed. And at the same time, they're pocketing more than ever. And here's what we're going to do to fix it. We have to have fighters who can deliver that message at every single level. And so, Brian, I want to thank you for having me on. I hope that folks, you can go to colinallred.com and get involved with us, because we really do have an opportunity to do something special here in Texas. And what I'm trying to do is make sure we do that both in my congressional district, but also help the Senate campaign move forward to do it.
And I'm going to put that link in the post description of this video. I also have one last question that doesn't have to do with the campaign here. And that is, you played for the Tennessee Titans in a past life. Tennessee Titans are currently, I believe, last place in the AFC. Is that correct?
I just won a game yesterday. Yeah, that's right.
Just won a game yesterday. And that was actually good news for me, because my team, the New York Giants, is now the worst team in football. And so my question is this. If you have teams that are this bad, where there's no way that you can, you're eliminated from the playoffs, you're just in the throes of humiliation because your season's shot anyway, you're at 2-11. If you're looking at the draft for next year, how does it work? Like, how does it work? Because obviously you don't want to throw games, but at the same time, you also have a number one draft pick waiting for you at the other end of this. And so I'm just curious what the mindset is for guys who are so competitive that they want to go out there and leave it all on the field every single week. But at the same time, if you win and you become, instead of 2-11 or 2-12 or 2-13, now you're 3-11 or 3-12, like, that doesn't get you anything. And so just walk me through that a little bit now that both teams that you and I have some association with are at the bottom of the ladder here.
Yeah, I mean, football is a different sport when it comes to tanking, because you can get hurt in any play, right? And so football players don't like it when, even if they're on a bad team, people think that, oh, we just go ahead and lose. Because it's like, hey, listen, this could be my last game, buddy. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm running down the field. I'm going to run high speed into another really big guy. I don't know what might break, And so I think that for the players themselves, the idea of tanking is always hard. But for organizations, that's where they have to then say, okay, we're not viable right now. We should probably trade away, some of the players that we have that can be assets for the future in terms of draft picks. and take it out of the players' hands and let those players play hard because they're fighting for their career. Most of those guys from a week-to-week basis are hoping just they can get another year.
Yeah.
There's only small percentage that know that they're going to have guaranteed roles in the year to come, right? And so every year there's going to be so much turnover on a football roster at the bottom kind of 20 of the 53-man roster. So those 20 guys, they're going to be playing as hard as they can because they're playing not just for their team, but for every team watching. But
Right.
for the organization, I'd say, hey, think long term. And I see what the New York Jets did, just for example, in trading, a couple of their best players for number one picks for second round picks. They're well positioned to have some great drafts coming up because of that. I don't know if they'll take advantage of it, but they're in a good position, right? And so that to me is, as a player, I'll be like, don't tell me to try and lose a game so you can get a draft pick next year. I might not even be here.
Right.
But if I'm the GM, then I'm thinking differently.
Right, right. Well, first of all, I can say that if you think the Jets may be well positioned, but that has never stopped them from
That's never
executing
stopped
from
No.
from like
That's
losing
right.
from like losing that well positioning. And the second thing is, I was at the last game, the last game of the season that the Giants won. I think it was against the Colts last year, where it was all they had to do to secure their number one draft spot was just lose one more game, and they beat the Colts. And me and everybody else in the stadium was like, the Giants can't even lose correctly.
Exactly. And
So
I get that, man. I do. As a fan watching it from a distance now, but if I was on that field, I'm telling you, I would have tried to get that win too.
yeah,
You know?
yeah.
So
Well, I'm going to put the link to your website right here on the screen, also in the post description of this video. Again, for folks watching, this is a district that hopefully Republicans have drawn so thin out of their greed that it is actually gettable. And in an environment where we're seeing these seats swing 12, 13, 14, 15 points to the left, everything is suddenly on the table as it wasn't before. So again, that link is right here on the screen and also in the post description. Colin Allred, thanks so much for your time. Best of luck in the campaign trail.
thank you. Appreciate it.